Welcome back to Yellowstone Valley Tech. Now, in the last video, we took a look at the out-of-the-box performance of the XFX Radeon RX 570 RS 8GB Black Edition. Considering the PC it's currently calling home, I'd say we saw some pretty decent numbers. Now, I also said in the last video that the RX 570 has a decent reputation of being a solid 1080p gaming card, but while the numbers were nice and all, I want to see just how far we can push this thing. So we're going to go ahead and overclock the graphics core and the GDDR5 memory. We're going to see how much performance we can actually squeeze out of our graphics card.
For overclocking the RX 570, we will be using MSI Afterburner. This software is easy to use and monitors plenty of aspects of the GPU performance, so we can get an idea of how much we stand to gain. After installing Afterburner from MSI's website, the first thing we're going to do is set a custom fan curve. Now, you can play around with this to get the best thermal performance for your setup. Keep in mind that your case will have an impact on cooling, especially if it's starved for airflow. Now, as you can see from the graph, I have the fan set to run at 40% until it gets above about 30 degrees Celsius, and will only run at full speed if the card goes above 80 C. Now, with my setup, the GPU idles around 25 C and is not gone above 75 C even during these benchmarking sessions. Again, play around with the curve and find the best settings for you. Now that we have the fan curve sorted out, the next step is to set the power limit slider to max or plus 50, and then click on that check mark. This will allow the card to take in a bit more power than it would otherwise, and that can help us get a more stable overclock with this GPU. Now, before we go any further, please remember that overclocking your hardware, while allowing you to squeeze more performance out of it, can cause damage if you push it too far with voltage or if you don't have adequate cooling. Now, with that said, let's dive right into it. Now, when going through this process, it's important to test stability after each incremental increase. Afterburner gives you 5 profiles that you can save to. For me, each one was a slight step up and then tested for stability before moving on. After plenty of tinkering and persistence, I found the sweet spot for my particular graphics card. I have the GPU clocked at a snappy 1435 MHz, and the memory was brought up to 1947. I was able to push the memory clock a bit higher, but I started noticing some drops in the scores from these benchmarks, so I backed it off a touch. Now, looking at Unigen superposition, the RX 570 scored 2003 at 1080p extreme with stock settings. With this overclock, we get a score of 2489. This is an increase of 19.1% on the superposition scores. Now, what does that exactly mean? Well, it's an increase from a 15.7 FPS average to 18.6 FPS, or roughly 15.6%. Next up, we'll look at any of the improvements to be seen in the Valley benchmark. Initial out-of-the-box performance landed us a score of about 1614 with the Extreme HD preset. After dialing in the OC, we received a score of 1766, a bump of about 8.7%. Not nearly the increase we saw from superposition. Again, moving from 40.6 FPS to an average of 42.2 FPS sees a real-world performance increase of about 3.8%. The results from the Heaven benchmark show a little bit better increase. At stock configuration, the RX 570 scored 1134 from the Extreme preset. After the overclock, we scored a 1532. This equates to roughly 24% increase on the score. As far as performance, at stock, the RX 570 gave us the average of about 57.6 FPS. Overclocking the card gave us 60.8 FPS, so closer to about 5.3% performance. Finally, 3D Mark Time Spy had the stock card sitting at a score of about 2611. With the overclock applied, we see an increase of 34%, giving us a score of 3945. Now, these synthetic tests show us only one side of the story. After getting this second set of results, I decided to fire up some games to see how much better it was. And
Yeah, that'll have to wait till next time. But I will say that the RX 570 does show some promise at 1080p. Now, considering it's being held back by the A8 5600K, I feel like we're going to see some much better numbers once we get into a modern platform. Anyway, that'll be it for this week, guys. Go ahead and toss me a like if you enjoyed the video. If not, you certainly know where that button is. Get subscribed to the channel to enjoy new content coming at you soon. And if you really enjoy our work, please consider supporting us on Patreon. That'll be linked down in the description below, along with our merch store where you can grab some hoodies and stickers and mugs, all sorts of good stuff. Well, thanks again for watching, folks. I'm your host, Andrew. We'll see you next time.